In December of 2021, we presented the first part of our story on Burmese independence, and this week, as promised, we are going to conclude that story. If you haven't watched that video yet, you really should go watch so that this episode makes complete sense. Where we left off was with the 1947 assassination of one of the most prominent Burmese independence leaders, General Aung San, and the subsequent declaration of independence of the new Burmese state, led by Thakin Nu. I'm your host David, and this week we are finally bringing you the conclusion of our two-part series on post-war Burma. This is the Cold War. So, Thakin Nu lacked the charisma and skills of Aung San, although it is speculative at best to assume that Aung San would have been able to hold such a divided nation together. Within 3 months of Independence Day, meaning Burma's Independence Day, not the Will Smith movie, the Communist Party of Burma, the CPB, was also known as the Red Flags, rose up in an armed rebellion. This communist rebellion attracted many soldiers and officers from the army who deserted their posts en masse to join the insurgents. On top of this, the communist forces were not the only insurgent faction within Burma at this time. Resistance leaders during the Japanese occupation had retained their local armies after the war. These pocket armies, for the time being anyway, were fighting on the side of official government forces, the Tatmadaw. But at the end of the day, they took orders from their own leaders, and their loyalty towards the central government was questionable, to say the least. By November, the troubles of the Rangoon regime had doubled as the Karen National Union and Mon separatists demanded independence and claimed large parts of lower and southeastern Burma for their new state. The central government, naturally, declined to grant them independence, which led to an armed uprising, which actually proved to be the most dangerous challenge for the Anti-Fascist People's Freedom League, the AFPFL, regime. At one point, the rebels even came close to capturing Rangoon. Numerous Karens who were serving in the Tatmadaw and the police joined the uprising, further weakening government strength. By the early months of 1949, the strength of the Burmese army was reduced to as few as 2,000 troops. But it was thanks to those pocket armies and to local levies that were raised that the Rangoon regime could continue to fight and wasn't toppled by the rebels. Now, if you think the situation couldn't get worse for Nu and his followers, well, you'd be dead wrong, because in 1949, two new major opponents joined the fray and further threatened the existence of the young Burmese state. The first threat came from former members of the People's Volunteer Organization, the PVO, a paramilitary group that had been set up by Aung San and had up to that point been part of the AFPFL. But following political infighting that stemmed from Nu's wish to disarm them, they took up arms against Nu by mid-summer. They became known as the White Band PVOs, in contrast to the Yellow Band members who remained loyal to the regime. The second challenge came in December in the form of an external enemy making its appearance along the northeastern border. These were soldiers of the Kuomintang, recently defeated by the People's Liberation Army of the Chinese Communist regime in Yunnan. These defeated forces were now crossing the border into Burma by the hundreds. They set up bases in parts of the Shan states, from where they would continue to fight both the PRC and the Burmese, as well as engaging in black market activities in order to fund their struggle. This included the age-old practice of smuggling opium in China. The presence of Kuomintang troops worried the Burmese government, as they feared that Beijing might decide to invade and claim the Shan states, if not annexing the entirety of Burma. Counteroffensives were launched by the Tatmadaw to reclaim the lost provinces, but they were not successful, and the KMT maintained their presence. So, in the first 2 years since independence, the future of the central government looked grim and its situation was dire. But, and there's always a but, their opponents were in no better shape. Sure, they seemed more successful, but they were equally disorganized and, moreover, didn't always fight in unison with other rebel groups. The Tatmadaw was slowly but steadily recovering after the waves of mass desertion, and following a piecemeal strategy, started to tip the scales in its favor. The first victory came in March 1950 with the recapture of the city of Taungoo, which served as the seat of the Kyaw Thu Lei or Karen state government. In May, they captured Prome, and by August, government troops had found and killed the Karen leader Saba Ugi. His death greatly hurt the morale of the Karen insurgents. New's Union government recovered enough land over the year to finally decide to hold elections in 1951. The AFPFL naturally dominated the ballot box as their rivals were in open rebellion and didn't participate. New would continue to lead the country until the April elections of 1956, when the leadership was passed to Ba Sui, but New would reclaim prime ministership in 1957. In the 6 years following the 1951 election, the situation in war-torn Burma didn't change a great deal. The Tatmadaw grew stronger and continued to recover land that had been lost to the numerous insurgent groups, but they were nowhere near ending the rebellions themselves. After a 1953 diplomatic appeal to the UN, negotiations were started to begin the withdrawal of Kuomintang forces from the Shan states. Over the following year, many of the KMT troops evacuated the area, crossing the border into Thailand. However, some 6,000 irregulars had stayed behind and continued to fight. They wouldn't be defeated until 1961, when a combined Burmese and Communist Chinese offensive finally broke down the remaining KMT troops, who then evacuated to Taiwan or fled into Thailand or Laos. Of course, rebels weren't the only problem the central government had to deal with. From the very beginning, they faced the ruined post-colonial economy of Burma. Vowing to never let capitalism control the Burmese market, they passed various socialist reforms. Though these were made in good faith and were an honest attempt to save the crumbling economy, they were insufficient and in some cases resulted in an even bigger disaster. By 1957, even New would admit that trying to fix the economy without first resolving the civil war and general lawlessness was a grave mistake. He said, quote, "Our greatest blunder was our diversion to economic and social welfare activities as soon as the law and order situation improved slightly, instead of concentrating all our energies on the complete restoration of law and order in the country." The following year, 1958, would prove to be one of the most important years in post-colonial Burmese history. The People's Comrade Party, as well as the Mon National Defense Organization and several other insurgent groups, agreed to lay down their arms and return to the national fold. But perhaps the most important development in that year was the split of the AFPFL and the subsequent installment of a caretaker government. So the life of the 14-year-old political alliance came to an end in April 1958 when it was split in two. On one side was the Clean, led by New and Thakin Tin, and on the other side, the Stable faction, under Kyaw Nyen and Ba Sui. The reasons for this schism were both institutional and personal. In hindsight, we can say it was a miracle that it lasted as long as it did. The AFPFL was a political alliance and consisted of many parties with widely different opinions on both domestic and foreign policies. These issues were brought to the surface once the insurgent threat seemed to wane. The removal of the outside threat allowed for greater friction between these various members of the AFPFL. These differences were further complicated by personal rivalries, making the AFPFL's implosion all but inevitable. Following the split, New dissolved parliament and announced new elections. The ensuing political crisis soon spiraled out of control. It had begun with the expulsion of Stable sympathizers from the police, the civil service, and the army, but by mid-September, murders of both Clean and Stable politicians were being reported. Burma was once again a powder keg, and the threat of yet another civil war loomed. This time, the army decided to act. They surrounded Rangoon and captured primary strategic positions, but even having done so, they didn't want a direct confrontation with forces loyal to New on the grounds that the communists would seize the opportunity to reassert themselves. With no other way out, New agreed to resign and hand over power for a 6-month period to a caretaker government led by the general of the Tatmadaw, Ne Win. Although it looked like a military coup, walked like a military coup, quacked like a military coup, it wasn't a military coup, at least not officially. New publicly declared he had invited the army to protect the country at a time of major crisis. Naturally, some political groups were opposed to the idea of the army taking over the administrative duties of the government and protested alongside students, with little to no effect whatsoever. Now, importantly for what was to come in the future, this caretaker government proved to be extremely efficient in its efforts to restore order and fight corruption on every level. 371 corrupt politicians were investigated and arrested in the following months. Another priority of Ne Win's government was rebuilding Rangoon and restoring it to its pre-war glory. Their first move was to resettle the squatters that had flooded into the city, largely as a consequence of the ongoing civil war. And it wasn't only immigrants that had flooded to the city, but garbage too. It kept piling up on the streets, mainly due to corruption. Garbage truck drivers did only a fraction of the required trips and then sold the remaining fuel for the trucks on the black market. So Ne Win launched cleanup campaigns, and not just in Rangoon, but all over the country, mobilizing civilians and soldiers alike. The campaigns also targeted stray animals like crows, mice, and especially dogs that had become a nuisance for the residents of the capital. The new administration had used a humane but ineffective strategy of capturing and resettling the animals, refusing to exterminate them for religious reasons. The army, however, had no such inhibitions and laid poisoned meats on the streets, killing up to 50,000 dogs in just 6 months. For many of you watching, this may seem like a brutal strategy, but the threat posed to the populace of the city by packs of roaming feral dogs was deemed too dangerous to let it continue. The streets of Rangoon, now free of feral four-legged animals, continued to be cleaned up, with the next target being the dangerous gangs who squatted in public buildings. As a result of the constant presence of police and troops, crime rates plummeted. But the army did more than just patrol the streets and arrest criminals. It also enforced a tight moral discipline, including the suppression of pornography and even pressing bus drivers to use polite language. Finally, the caretaker government cracked down on economic criminals, namely hoarders and those who dealt on the black market. They additionally sought to reduce the cost of living and limit profiteering, and to do so, they instituted price controls and in some cases also the supply of certain goods which they assumed to be essential commodities. Fish, firewood, nylon, those sorts of things. The tremendous success of the caretaker government could perhaps be the reason the leader of the stable faction of the AFPFL, Ba Sui, announced on January 1st, 1959 that he wouldn't object if 6 more months were added to the caretaker government's term. On the other hand, New and the Clean AFPFL pressured Ne Win to honor their promise and hold elections in April. Ne Win proved to be a shrewd politician and resigned in February, explaining that he couldn't guarantee free and fair elections without jeopardizing the ongoing anti-rebel campaign. He then demanded an amendment be made to the constitution, removing the 6-month term limit for non-parliamentary members, as well as spreading rumors that the Clean AFPFL had been infiltrated by communists. These claims were backed up by copies of a Communist Party directive. He was afterwards reinstated as Prime Minister, and the Union Constitution was amended to allow him to remain in the seat of power until 1960. With that political maneuvering, Ne Win had bought some time for his regime, but he couldn't hold on to his seat indefinitely. In the elections held in February, the Clean AFPFL triumphed, and New would lead the country once again. New's landslide victory came because of 2 promises he made in his electoral campaign. He vowed to make Buddhism the state religion, thus gaining the support of the Buddhist majority, along with its influential clergy, and secondly, he promised autonomous states to the Arakanese and the Mons. In an attempt to distance this new era from the previous disastrous terms, the AFPFL was reorganized into the Union Party. The new civilian government tried to show that it could be just as efficient as the army had been in managing the country, and introduced further reforms to improve agriculture, communications, and to fight off the endemic corruption. They also removed some of the policies of the caretaker government, as they were unhappy with them and wanted a, quote, non-army controlled economy. The big change, as New had promised during campaigning, would affect religious life and matters of self-determination for some groups. In June of 1961, at the Conference of States in Tanguy, the majority of delegates voted in favor of federalism, and in a later press conference, New didn't rule out the possibility of switching to a federal government. This willingness to change Burma's unitary constitution to a federal one greatly upset the top echelons of the Tatmadaw, who perceived it as a sign of weakness and felt that the hard-won victories over the insurgents, where so many men had paid the ultimate price, were all for nothing. New's promised religious reforms weren't welcomed either. Non-Buddhists believed that Buddhism, becoming the formal religion, would make them second-class citizens, and they would then be discriminated against by the state. New made assurances that there were laws in place to prevent this, and that he would legislate more in case the existing laws weren't enough, but this did little to calm people's worries. In August, the amendment to the Constitution was presented and passed, receiving 320 votes in favor and only 28 against. Now, with hindsight being 2020, we can say that New should have listened to his opposition, because in the following months, religious violence became more and more frequent. One of the more notable incidents was the burning of several mosques by militant monks in North Okalapa on the outskirts of Rangoon. In the ensuing riots, rioters began to sack stores and houses alike, to which the police reacted by opening fire, resulting in the deaths of 5 people. These protests were resolved only after the government decided to take the destroyed mosques under its control. New's third term as prime minister was, to that point, still better when compared to those of the previous decade. However, he couldn't compete with the comparative success that the military caretaker government had enjoyed, and much of the relative stability the country was experiencing was because of Ne Win's regime. The military was still held in high regard and was praised for its performance during the 1958 to 1960 caretaker period. Democracy was associated with political discord, instability, and national disorder. New's willingness to sacrifice national unity and his religious blunder had alarmed the Tatmadaw leadership, who now wondered if it would perhaps be better to step in and once again assume control of the country. The future path that Burma was to take seemed laid out. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and make sure to take precautions against the packs of feral dogs who are protecting the bell button. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.